We have a kind of one of our mantras in our organization is we're slow to hire and quick to fire. It doesn't mean that, hey, I don't like the way you're combing your hair today, you're out of here. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that we are looking for people who want to work with us. And that doesn't mean that we just hire warm bodies, okay? But sadly, that's how a lot of hiring happens in organizations. We're very reflexive, right? And we just want to get somebody in here, to fill the role. So we would rather live with the pain of being short-staffed for a short period of time and bring on somebody who has an emotional connection with us, who understands our core values, who understands our mission, who wants to be on our team. But that assumes that we are communicating not only internally, but externally to the world, which assumes that you've got a vision for your organization. It assumes you have a mission, that somewhere you're pushing that out to the world. It assumes that you have team members already that are speaking well of you, right? It's just like any kind of business or marketing, right? Word of mouth is really the best form of marketing there is. So if your team members are telling their friends and people that they bump into, hey, I love my job, you ought to come and work here, that really is the best. So if we start there, that makes the rest of it easy. Now, when I say quick to fire, I should kind of finish this up. We've all made these hires, right? Where in the first couple of days, you just know in your gut, this is, why did I bring this person on board? But we're too busy or we're too afraid to talk to the person, to give them honest, direct feedback. And so all of a sudden, it's day number 89 of their probationary period, and you tell yourself, oh, I can't let the person go, one day before the probationary period, or it's a holiday or whatever the excuse is. And then the next thing you know, 3 years later, you still have this person on your team who's a thorn in the side, who's not productive, that you knew a long time ago. So what we do is, as soon as we get to that point, we encourage everybody, let people go quickly, which to say, hey, it's not working out. I'm setting you free to go do something else, right? So, but let's assume that we have got them in the organization and we don't want to coach them out yet, but we'd rather coach them up. Then it takes a lot of communication. So I do think that you can have a low performer on your team or someone who's really not that engaged and turn them into a cheerleader for the organization. I really do believe that that's possible. We've seen it in our organizations over and over again, where I've had somebody where it's been down to the point where we have to, this is your final warning, there's a morale problem or whatever, but by coaching them up and really trying to figure out who are they as a person, making sure that they're on the right seat on the bus, as Jim Collins says. People want to be on a winning team. They want to feel good about themselves. But, the Gallup organization says that based on their State of the American Workforce survey, that about 70% of the American workforce is disengaged or actively disengaged. Well, the reason that they're disengaged or actively disengaged is because they're not being professionally developed, or they're not feeling like they have an impact on the organization. And so if we can help them feel like they've got a direct impact on the success of the organization, then they become more engaged and they end up becoming a cheerleader. So listen, I think that we need to remember that managers are not leaders. So that's number one. And number two is very timely based on our conversation today, is politicians aren't leaders, okay? We wish that our politicians were leaders, but that's really not their job, okay? And so we have these weird expectations. So what are some of the core principles of effective leaders? Well, I think number one is that leaders lead from the front. I'm a big believer in that. I think bosses are the ones, or managers are the ones who stand in the rear and crack the whip, right? But it's really leaders that are out front showing how to do things. Leaders need to serve people constantly. And they shouldn't be above, getting their hands dirty, right? But the thing that seems to be my hot button issue right now, and I just did a webinar about this recently, is I wish that more leaders would show vulnerability. We've gotten so stuck in this kind of command and control type of leadership style that leaders thinking that, boy, if I show my failings, if I show my flaws, if I show my vulnerabilities, then I'm showing weakness. Well, that is so far from the truth. People want to know that you're human. And I've spent 9 years in the military, in the Army. 8 of those were in Special Forces, the Green Berets. And so I've seen, and obviously been in business for a long time as well, 30 years. So I've seen real world leadership in both the military and in business. And I can tell you the leaders that I most want to follow or emulate are those ones that show a little bit of humility and some vulnerability, because we get an emotional connection to them, right? You don't get an emotional connection to an automaton. You just don't, You start scratching your head like, do they have no feelings? Do they have no empathy? And so I think empathy and vulnerability are kind of keys to the success of leaders today, particularly those leaders who are leading millennials. Now, this is a generalization. It's a stereotype. There are good millennials and bad millennials. But the generalization is that millennials, more than previous generations, do want to have a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose, right? And so as leaders, if we can create a sense of belonging and purpose in organizations, we're going to have a better connection with our team members, which means higher productivity, lower turnover, a variety of ways. It's a positive thing.
No, I think all of these are fantastic points, and it makes sense if you think about just the success industry as a whole, having taken a shift to saying, what certain guru or certain people struggles where that have attracted their audience altogether. It's like saying, hey, I was poor, and then everybody who's poor saying, oh, well, I relate to that. I know what that's like. So
yeah,
it's ultimately the same thing. It's just evolved in a different fashion.
Yeah, I agree.
So very, very cool. So, one of the other, I guess, my final real questions before we run out of time here is I wanted to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship in general. You talked a little bit about how you've kind of cultured your own family and into identifying kind of problems and looking at solutions ahead of time. If you look at the rise of entrepreneurship today, and I know you mentor people as well, so let's talk a little bit about what do you see as a common problem amongst younger entrepreneurs, not millennials or not, people who are new to business today. What is the correction you feel that they need to hear about?
Well, kind of 5 things kind of come up, honestly. And the first one is that because we're human and we're flawed, we have this negative chatter that circles in our head all the time. I'm not smart enough, I'm not rich enough, I'm not white enough, I'm not black enough, I'm not tall enough, whatever, I'm not educated enough, right? So I think that we need to do anything we can to get rid of that negative chatter, and that is put positive information into our brain. Surround ourselves with people and readings and music and shows, radio programs, podcasts that speak positivity into our lives. You got to get rid of that negative chatter. Because honestly, there's a lot of negative stuff that's out there. All right. Secondly, I think you have to focus on your strengths, which means that we have to know what our strengths are, which means we got to do some self-reflection, and it means that we need to be doing a lot of assessments, whether it's the Kolbe A Index, whether it's Strength Finders, whether it's Myers-Briggs. We need to know who are we from a DNA perspective, okay? Because if we don't know what our strengths are, then we tend to end up hiring and partnering with people that are just like us, right? Which is what I call it having mini-me's. You can't have a bunch of mini-me's, right? You're going to have holes in your repertoire. So my point is, know your strengths and then hire people to augment your weaknesses. Don't worry about know what your weaknesses are, but then hire people whose strengths are your weaknesses. The next thing is, too many people, I think, are really over analytical and they don't take rapid action. One of my favorite quotes, and if you were at my house, you would see on my refrigerator is the sign. In my car, I've got this quote. On my bulletin board at work, I've got this, and it's a quote by General George Patton that says, "A good plan, violently executed today, is better than a perfect plan next week." Patton doesn't talk about a perfect plan or a stellar plan or an awesome plan. He talks about just a good plan, but violently executed today. And that's so important, I think. Sometimes first to market doesn't mean best to market, but oftentimes first to market means that you actually start building loyalty with people. The next thing is we got to expect and embrace failure. Too many people are afraid to fail. And I think that young entrepreneurs, they want so much quality that they're afraid to fail sometimes. But we learn more from our failings and our mistakes when we analyze them than we do from our successes and from our failures. And then I guess the last thing, number 5, would be that just don't give up. And I don't subscribe to that quote, never, never, never quit. Because I think that if we all ascribe to that, we'd be driving our lives and our businesses right off the cliff. But when I say never give up, sometimes we need to know when to say enough is enough. This is damaging my family. This is, taking me too far off course. So those are kind of the things that kind of pop up that I think are good tenets for life, but also for young entrepreneurs as well.